Have you ever believed that family was the safest fortress you had until one day it turned into the most brutal battlefield? Thanksgiving night should have been a warm reunion, but for Evelyn Brooks, it became the moment when everything good in her past crumbled beneath her feet. In the arms of those she loved most, she became the one accused, the one cast out of the blood-bound circle. This isn't just a story of betrayal, it's the journey of a woman who stood up and fought to reclaim her honor and the trust in herself, something she once thought would always be safeguarded by her family. Follow along to see how Evelyn turned doubt into strength and how she found her own light in the darkness of a love that had long since lost its truth. Evelyn Brooks stood in the warm kitchen of her family's home in the Vermont suburbs, the place she once belonged to, the place that had been her absolute safe haven throughout the years of her childhood. Her hands clutched a still warm pumpkin pie, her mother's favorite. She had carefully made it the night before, following her mother Martha's old recipe, with a hint of nutmeg and half a teaspoon of maple syrup that Martha always said brought out the sweetness of memory. She had driven 3 hours through dense fog just to make it home in time, just so that this pie would have a place on the Thanksgiving table as a testament that no matter what Evelyn still remembered, her roots still honored those deep family ties that once held her heart so firmly. But as she stepped through the door into the dining room, she immediately sensed the change. It wasn't the smell of roasted turkey, or the clink of porcelain dishes, it was the heavy atmosphere, as if every bit of warmth had been sucked from the house. Her father, Richard Brooks, sat at the head of the table, his icy gaze fixed on her, not the gaze of a father who once cradled her, but that of a stranger seeing an intruder trespassing on forbidden ground. "Give back the $50,000, Evelyn," he said, each word heavy final as if he had rehearsed this line in his head for a very long time. "If you don't ever come back." She froze the pie still in her arms, the oven's lingering warmth a faint comfort against the storm rising in her chest. Her sister Megan sat silently beside him, her hands folded neatly in her lap as if she were holding down some secret. Her brother Nathan wouldn't meet her eyes, his stare locked on the pristine white tablecloth, as if even a glance at her would crack the truth wide open in the middle of the feast. Even her mother Martha, who always hid her worries behind gentle smiles, couldn't bring herself to look up. Evelyn stood there still gripping the pie, not even having time to take a breath, and greet her mother with the softest voice she knew. But the people she loved had already turned into strangers in the very house she once called her home. The pie in her hands suddenly felt unbearably heavy, pressing down on the ache in her chest. Her breaths came short. The crisp Vermont autumn air outside now felt like an impossible luxury far beyond her reach. She didn't understand why, didn't understand how they could be so cold. But in that moment, Evelyn knew one thing: she was no longer part of them. No longer the little girl who had been cradled and comforted whenever she was scared. She was nothing but someone to be accused, someone who wasn't allowed to place that pie on the table, who wasn't allowed to rekindle the warmth in that familiar kitchen. And in that moment a whisper echoed in her heart. Not the voice of those she loved, but the voice of doubt and hurt that had been buried for far too long. Does blood still mean anything when trust has been lost? Evelyn couldn't leave right away, even though every sense in her body screamed at her to run from this place. She still stood there in the brightly lit kitchen, the warmth of the pumpkin pie still lingering in her hands like the last breath of a memory about to be buried. In those brief seconds she looked around, her mother still avoiding her gaze, her hands trembling as she straightened a napkin, as if searching for something familiar to cling to. Megan, her sister, who used to curl up in Evelyn's arms on nights she was afraid, now sat with her head bowed, her lips pressed together tightly, hiding something Evelyn couldn't yet bear to name. And Nathan, her brother, who used to hold her hand through Vermont's bitter winters, now stared at the wooden floor, his face blank and cold as if carved from marble. "What's happening?" Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling even as she tried to keep it calm, as if any crack would shatter everything. But no one answered. only the heavy silence thick like a velvet curtain blocking out every breath. In that moment, Evelyn felt like she was the only living thing left in a family portrait that had long since faded. She set the pie down on the kitchen counter gently as if afraid to break the last bit of warmth that remained. Her fingers were still shaking not from the cold, but from the storm of shock and fear she didn't yet have a name for swirling inside her. Dad, why would you say that? She drew a deep breath slowly as if trying to steady herself against an accusation she couldn't comprehend. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Evelyn Richard Brooks's voice came cold and distant, so much so that she felt the man before her was no longer her father. You know what you did. Your mother's account $50,000 vanished right after you helped her set up online banking. All the evidence points to you. Don't disappoint this family any more than you already have. The words cut into her like a knife, sharp and merciless. She opened her mouth to protest, but there were no words strong enough to pierce the suffocating silence pressing down on her. Her mother still wouldn't look at her, only gripped the napkin as if letting go would shatter all her fragile composure. Megan glanced at her, her eyes red but resolute, as if she had already convinced herself the matter was clear. Evelyn felt like she was floating away, drifting from that kitchen, from the smell of roasting turkey and the soft clatter of pots on the stove. Childhood memories, her mother brushing her hair in the mornings, Nathan pulling her out to build snowmen after the blizzards, Megan pressing into her side, trembling in summer storms, each one turned into a shard cutting deep into her heart. She turned, reaching for her coat draped over the back of a chair. Her hands still trembled, but her eyes no longer searched for answers in the familiar faces. She understood that if she stayed, she would no longer be herself. If this is what everyone believes, she said quietly, her voice as still and solemn as the night outside, then I have nothing left to say. She walked out, each step heavy as if the floor itself was trying to hold her back. When the door closed behind her, Evelyn took a long breath, the chill of the night air crashing into her lungs like a shock. The narrow road in front of the house was still and silent, the neighbors' Christmas lanterns hanging from porches still glowing, but to her, the light felt like a cruel reminder of the distance she could never bridge. She didn't know how long she drove. The fog-covered road seemed endless, and she clung to the steering wheel as if it was the only reality she had left. Each streetlight she passed pulsed like a heartbeat in her chest, each shadow of a tree, marking the fracture of a life already split apart. She didn't cry. Tears were a luxury she could no longer afford. When Evelyn finally stopped in front of a shabby roadside motel, a place she had driven by countless times but never really seen, she realized her hands had gone numb. The small room smelled of old carpet and microwave popcorn, but at least it gave her a space no one could touch. She sat on the edge of the bed, the dim yellow light reflecting her face in the cracked mirror. It was no longer the face of a girl returning home for a warm holiday meal. It was the face of someone who had been pushed out of the very home she once believed unbreakable. In the mirror, she saw her own eyes no longer shimmering with the desperate hope of being understood, no longer holding the fragile belief that doing everything right would earn her love. Now they were the eyes of a woman facing a hard truth, that sometimes the ones we love most are the ones who will push us into the deepest pit of doubt and betrayal. Evelyn leaned back against the wall, breathing deep. She knew there was no turning back. And in that instant she vowed she would never again let anyone, even those she had once called family, bury her truth and her dignity. The next morning, as the pale winter sun filtered through the thin curtains, Evelyn woke with an unusual sense of resolve. She no longer felt the fear or numbness of the night before, just a solid calm that spread from her chest all the way to her fingertips. She sat up, the thin blanket slipping to the floor like an old skin she was ready to leave behind. The air in the room still smelled of old carpet and microwave popcorn, but Evelyn didn't care. She had long since grown past being sensitive to the scent of failure. Now in her mind, there were only numbers transactions, and the traces she knew better than anyone. She made herself a cup of black coffee, the steam rising and fogging the glass table. Her hand trembled slightly as she raised the mug to her lips. But it wasn't fear. It was the thrill of a hunter who had finally spotted the first tracks of her prey. Evelyn opened her laptop, the familiar feel of the keyboard beneath her fingers giving her strength. As a forensic accountant, her job was to trace vanishing money to unearth hidden transactions and blurred statements meant to deceive. But this time, she wasn't doing it for a faceless corporation. This time, she was doing it to reclaim her own honor. She started with her mother's account, Lakeview Mutual, a small but long-standing bank, where her mother had always trusted her savings. Evelyn remembered perfectly the day she helped her mother set up online banking. Her mother had been nervous about the technology, afraid of things like the cloud and one-time passwords. Evelyn had sat patiently by her side, explaining every step, every screen recording, every password and security question in a small notebook that her mother kept in the kitchen drawer, a drawer anyone could open. She opened her private work folder where she stored all the investigative tools she had gathered over the years. She began with a transaction extraction, not just the online transfers, but every transaction, including the in-person cash withdrawals. Her eyes scanned the numbers line by line like a conductor leading an orchestra of truth. And when she saw the 3 large cash withdrawals, $20,000, then $15,000, then another $15,000, she knew she had found the first crack. 3 withdrawals totaling $50,000 done directly at the bank branch, not a single one through the online banking app they had blamed her for. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, breathing deeply, the mixture of excitement and dread coiling in her chest. She knew the next step: the security footage. With a single email to the bank's compliance department, a privilege she still had thanks to her professional connections, Evelyn requested the footage from those 3 withdrawals. And just an hour later, the tense wait ended when a reply arrived in her inbox. She opened the first video. The image was not movie clear but sharp enough for Evelyn to recognize Megan's neat blonde ponytail, the gray hoodie she always wore when she was cold, the anxious glance she cast around the bank's lobby. She watched Megan hand over documents to the teller, saw the familiar signature Evelyn had once admired on Christmas cards. A sharp pain cut through her chest, but Evelyn kept her eyes fixed, refusing to look away. The second video played. Nathan, her brother, approached the counter, calm, unhurried. He was still the composed man she had once trusted, still smiling and chatting casually with the teller as if he had nothing to hide. But that very ease sent a shiver down Evelyn's spine. It was that calmness that had made her the scapegoat in their eyes, while they still played the good children of the family. By the time she reached the final video, Evelyn no longer felt pain. There was only a cold certainty, an unshakable conviction she would not let them bury this truth. They didn't know that in her work every transaction was a link in a chain, and no link ever vanished without a trace. They didn't know that Evelyn had spent her entire career learning how to see what others tried so hard to hide. And this time she would see everything, not for a job, but for her own heart, for the dignity they had tried to strip away. Closing her laptop, Evelyn shut her eyes, letting the noise of cars outside and the wind through the trees lull her into a moment's stillness. Then she opened her eyes again, no longer trembling. Today she understood one thing: family was no longer an impenetrable fortress, and she, Evelyn Brooks, was going to tear down that fortress brick by brick until the truth stood in the light, where nothing could hide. Evelyn left the motel room with her laptop and the folder in her hands, the bitter wind slicing across her cheeks like a reminder that winter was near. But in her heart, there was no longer the winter of fear or loneliness. There was a quiet fire burning instead, the fire of determination and resolve she had never seen in herself before. She drove back to the city, each turn of the wheels on the pavement marking the rhythm of the thoughts tangling in her mind. They had crafted too perfect a story, a culprit with the face of the successful one, the outsider, and she had believed that if she just brought the pie home, everything would be calm again. But no, she had been too naive to trust in the sanctity of family dinners and the soft-spoken wishes of the holiday season. Evelyn sat in a small cafe on Main Street, where Christmas trees glowed brightly through the window, and the scent of roasted coffee and cinnamon wrapped around the cold air like a blanket. She opened the folder, the warm yellow light reflecting off the numbers, the bank statements, the blurry but damning video footage. Her eyes were fixed on each frame, each gesture. Megan and Nathan had shown no camera angle could hide the truth entirely. They had used their mother's trust, her trust as a cloak to cover stains no one wanted to see. But Evelyn had seen, and when a forensic accountant like her had seen that truth would never be buried again. She remembered Nathan's calm eyes so steady as if he'd done nothing wrong. She remembered Megan's voice soft but cold, like a dagger wrapped in velvet. They had coordinated it so well, chose the timing, the method, using Evelyn's own hands to open the door for themselves. But they had forgotten that Evelyn had spent her life tracing the faintest trails. They had forgotten that she was not just the lonely sister at a family dinner. She was a woman who had brought down walls of lies far bigger than the kitchen in her childhood home. The coffee cup in front of her had gone cold without her noticing. She was tracing in her mind the sharp lines of betrayal, 3 cash withdrawals, the same signature, the same reckless boldness of turning love into a disguise. And in the middle of it all, she knew this fight was no longer just about clearing her own name. It had become a battle for justice for those who still believed in family, a fight to reclaim her voice. Her mother's voice for the daughter who had brought all her love back home only to receive a sentence in return. When Evelyn stood up, she felt her shoulders lighten as if the invisible cloak of doubt had fallen away. She stepped outside and drew in a deep breath of Vermont's icy air. The sky was leaden gray, but in her eyes there was light already showing through the cracks in the clouds. She was no longer afraid of them, no longer afraid of the lies wrapped in forced laughter, no longer afraid of family meals where she was only a nameless extra. Because now Evelyn knew one thing for sure: the truth was here in her hands, and no one could deny it anymore. And she, Evelyn Brooks, would be the one to stand up to bring it all out into the light, to make them see whether they wanted to or not. On Monday afternoon, Evelyn returned to the old house, her hand gripping the folder like a final shield between herself and the storm waiting inside. The house was still there, the porch covered in dry maple leaves, the darkened brick walls in the twilight, all of it evoking memories she once believed would always be safe. But today her steps no longer faltered. She pushed open the door, and the warmth from the kitchen washed over her face, the scent of roasted chicken, cinnamon, and the sharp tang of secrets not yet revealed. They were all there around the old oak dining table, eyes hidden behind a mask of calm. Evelyn took a long breath, her gaze settling on each face, no unnecessary greetings. She walked straight to the kitchen where her mother was fussing over the plates, as if dinner could still save the fragments of this family. She placed the folder on the table light, but echoing like a final bell. "You all think I'm the thief?" she said, her voice not loud, not shaking, but enough to freeze the kitchen in place. "If that's true, then look closely." Her fingers turned each page, each image, each signature of Megan and Nathan laid bare, undeniable. The security footage from the bank, Megan's bowed head, her trembling hands signing Nathan's confident smile to the teller, each frame slicing through the quiet air of the kitchen like a blade. Megan looked at her, eyes red, but no more tears left. Nathan rested his elbows on the table, his shoulders trembling, but his gaze locked on the papers that exposed everything. And her mother, Martha. Her hands stopped mid-motion, the napkin slipping to her lap. Her eyes clouded over as if she no longer recognized the daughter who had brought home the pumpkin pie that night. Evelyn didn't move an inch. Her voice dropped lower, no softness left. "These aren't just meaningless numbers. They're the truth." Megan's own hand, Nathan's own smile as they took away your trust, mother. A silence roared heavier than the ticking clock counting down the seconds. Megan turned away, her voice breaking like a thin thread. You always had everything? I just wanted to level the field for once. Evelyn looked at her sister, no longer angry, just a cold sadness like the Vermont night wind. You didn't level anything, Megan, she said, her voice quiet but unyielding. You only burned it all down. Nathan swallowed hard as if he wanted to say something but found only silence. Evelyn lowered her voice, her eyes searching her mother's face for a trace of the past, a nod, an apology, a hand reaching out like it did when she was a little girl afraid of the dark. But her mother just looked at her tears brimming hands resting quietly in her lap, no longer knowing where to place her trust. Evelyn closed the folder, the soft snap of the cover final and deliberate. I don't want the police involved, she said, her tone not one of forgiveness, but of resolve. But I won't let this be buried. The entire truth has been sent to the lawyer. I'm leaving it to this family to decide whether it's truth or lies that will keep you together. Her gaze swept across each face one last time, a farewell that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Then she turned, leaving behind the silent kitchen and the gray shadows of a family who once thought blood could hide anything. But Evelyn knew from this moment on, the truth would no longer be buried in silence. And she, the girl who had once only bowed her head, now stood tall, walking out that door with her honor and dignity, things no one would ever take from her again. As Evelyn stepped out of that house, the sun had already set, leaving only a faint glow on the edge of the horizon. She took a deep breath, as if inhaling everything left of the past, and then exhaled steady and determined. The coat wrapped around her wasn't just to guard against the cold Vermont night, but the final armor she needed to cross the thin line between herself and those who had once been her entire world. She didn't look back, didn't need to see the kitchen where her mother's napkin had slipped to her lap, or her sister's eyes that would always haunt her like a scar that hadn't yet healed. Her hands still trembled slightly, but her heart no longer feared, only the resolute beat of someone who had gotten back up after being pushed down one last time. She drove back to Boston, the endless highway stretched out before her, like a road she'd been traveling her whole life, but never truly seen the end of. The bare trees reached out like pleading arms in the darkness, but Evelyn no longer felt afraid, because now she had become her own light, no longer needing anyone to show her the way. Arriving back in the city, the glass towers reflected the warm glow of streetlights like tiny fires to keep her warm in the cold night. Evelyn knew that starting tomorrow she would return to her work, to investigations where truth had a place that couldn't be denied by sweet words or false family ties. A few days later, her mother left a message on her machine, her voice faltering, weak and remorseful, like a late confession. Evelyn, I know I was wrong. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I hope you know that I believe you. Evelyn sat still, finger brushing the delete button like a ritual of letting go. She no longer needed that apology because she had learned that sometimes forgiveness isn't a gift you give to others, but a path you take to free yourself. She tucked the folder away in a drawer, a place she knew it would be safe, not because she feared it might be lost, but because she no longer needed to see it every day to remind herself she was innocent. Because in her heart, Evelyn already had her answer. Family had once been a place she believed nothing could tear apart, but now she understood blood wasn't always a safe harbor. And sometimes the bravest thing isn't to keep holding on to what's lost, but to know when to let go, when to walk away, without looking back. On her desk, the yellow lamp cast a gentle glow. Evelyn sat there, slowly sipping the bitter coffee and letting the sadness settle like the grounds at the bottom of her cup. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that there would be long nights and old memories that might still haunt her. But for the first time in so long, Evelyn felt free. Free from the accusations, from the doubting eyes, from the fear that had kept her bound for so many years. And in that moment, as the city outside waited quietly for a new day, she knew she had found something more precious than anything else, a belief no one could steal, a belief in herself. And so the story of Evelyn Brooks comes to a close here, not just a story of cold numbers or bank statements revealed, but of the courage of a heart once shattered. Evelyn understood that sometimes the most precious thing you can hold on to is your own faith and determination, not to be forgiven, but to find yourself again. If you see yourself in this story, if you've ever felt buried under the weight of accusations from those who were supposed to protect you, don't hesitate to share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel so you won't miss stories of dramatic family conflicts, of secrets uncovered, and of the healing journey of those brave enough to stand up against injustice. Together, we'll find answers and hope in the deepest corners of family.